All right, how is everyone doing today? Welcome to my channel. And this is an educational channel, and we try to check out great theories of everything, all-encompassing theories, cosmologies, cosmogonies, grand unified theories, magnum opuses, tour de forces, earth-shattering discoveries, and mostly from obscure sources, things that you probably haven't heard of before or you don't know too much about. And we're in a unit right now called the Reciprocal Church. Shouting out to the Reciprocal System of Theory from Dewey B. Larson, which I've done a number of videos, hundreds of videos on, and he is one of those obscure sources that articulated a cosmology, a theory of everything, never got any credit, never got paid, and his work is threatening to become extinct. So we're trying to revive important theories such as that. And in particular, in this unit, we are attempting to kind of assemble or syncretize a kind of new pragmatic religion, or what you would call a reciprocal religion. With a reciprocal religion, you are already a member. Everybody is a member. But when you get initiated, then you're no longer a member. And so you can advance your way out to gain some type of sovereignty in the reciprocal religion sense. That's all just kind of theoretical, a little bit tongue-in-cheek, but because there is, I guess, the only member of the Reciprocal Church, or maybe I'm the only non-member of the Reciprocal Church. But anyway, so we've been assembling some resources for putting together a religion. We are doing so mainly because I believe that the Western religions have been discredited and that they are going to collapse here very soon, as people realize and think about it a little bit, think about where these things came from. Somehow I think the Bible has just really gotten a free pass through everybody, every red-pilled person's critique. They've been too busy critiquing the conspiracies that have occurred in the last 200 years, especially in the last 62 years. But the conspiracy goes back to day one. Adam and Eve, before that even. And so we're going to have to come to grips with that. We're going to have to recognize that the Old Testament is mostly copied stories from much older traditions that talk about a very grotesque God with a small g, who is certainly not a God to be worshipped, but is a God in the sense that they are superior to us. They have more technology, and they've just been around longer than us, and so they have better access to information than we do, and so they keep us in the dark, and they treat us like, first they created us in test tubes, and then they used us as primitive workers. And then they upgraded us to domestic workers. And the one of them that was actually good, the snake, he eventually upgraded us to an actual spiritual entity. And the Bible also cherry picks a lot of pagan myths, a lot of myths from other groups of people, and a lot of astrology, astronomy, astrology, and very much jettisons any idea of a female deity whatsoever. And then we get to the New Testament, where it's kind of like God got an exorcism. And so the New Testament God is better than the Old Testament God, but the trade-off is that now you have to have Satan too. The Old Testament God was kind of both God and Satan at the same time. And the New Testament God, they separate them, but then you always have this specter of evil that is liable to kind of get more power than they deserve. And so, you know, that's, I guess, one way of looking at it. But the main part that we're kind of talking about this unit is really in terms of the New Testament being a psyop written by the Romans, the Roman emperors, Vespasian, Titus, and Domitian, between 69 and 96 AD, backdating it by 4 decades so that they could pretend that that Jesus prophesied the coming of Emperor Titus. The predictions that Jesus makes, Titus fulfills. And we're going to see that here. A lot of this is coming from Joseph Atwill's Caesar's Messiah, but also Michael Menescott's contributed a lot, and others as well. And but the where it comes from is really not that important, because it's a technical thing. You can read it for yourself. What you need is the New Testament, and then you need The War of the Jews by Josephus, and also Antiquities of the Jews by Josephus. And most Christians know the name of Josephus as kind of like the historian who actually validated Christianity by, in an aside, mentioning the name and the exploits of Jesus. The only person in the first century to have done so, even though he does it in Antiquities of the Jews, is 95 AD, so a good 60 years after the fact. But what is not well known is that Josephus was an agent of the Roman Caesars. He was so close to the Roman Caesars that he was actually the adopted son of Emperor Domitian, which makes him the adopted brother of Emperors Titus he was the adopted son of Emperor Vespasian and the adopted brothers of Titus and Domitian. So he lived at Rome, at the Roman court, for the whole time that he was writing these books, which were commissioned. At least War of the Jews was commissioned by Emperor Titus. And so his history cannot be taken seriously. And unfortunately, the Romans censored just about everything else. So Josephus is really the only source of history that we have from the first century, other than the Gospels. One has to wonder why the Gospels weren't censored. perhaps it was because the Gospels were being promoted by the Romans. They promoted Josephus, they promoted the Gospels, and they censored everything else. And perhaps that might explain why the Gospels are so pro-Roman. Jesus is always saying positive things about the Romans. You know, turn the other cheek and walk a second mile with his pack, and render under Caesar what is Caesar's. He compliments the Roman soldier commanding officer that comes to Jesus to get his slave healed, and he tells Jesus, "Oh, you don't even need to come over. I trust that you know how to heal him from here." And Jesus said, "I've never seen anybody, including all the Jews I live around, who has such great faith as you, the Roman commander." So, you know, it's a full-on pro-Roman, anti-Jew take, the Gospels. And but what we reviewed last time was kind of the way that this code is communicated. The Romans left a code in the Gospels and in the War of the Jews. If you read them, kind of like if you read them together, then the meaning becomes clear, and the meaning is grim. The meaning is, we are mocking you. You know, we are insulting you, and we are mocking you. And the Christians have kind of just taken the punishment all along the way. But you know, the Romans have promoted the Christian church because they developed it in themselves. And really the Gospels are very much just anti-Jew. The Christians hadn't really come along yet, you know. So when the Christians did come along, many of the first Christians were actually of the royal family, of the imperial family. Flavia Domitilla, she was, I believe, the sister of Titus. She is the one who had the catacombs in Rome, the first Christian burial site. And Clement of Rome became I guess either the second or the fourth pope. He was a family member of the Flavians as well, Flavian Clement. And then Bernice was also one of the first Christians. She was a Jew. She was a Herod. She was from the Herod dynasty, but she was the mistress of Titus. So many of the people that were very close to the Roman Empire were among the first Christians. A few of them were actually martyred as Christians because Domitian, who was very jealous of Titus, his older brother, and he put to death a lot of Christians in his reign. Although the martyrdom of Christians is definitely overstated, it did occur. And Domitian was one of the main emperors that was involved in, you know, the Christians versus lions kind of stuff. Now, so what we did last time was we introduced this typology, the way that you kind of read texts together. And we were showing in the book of Matthew, first couple chapters of the book of Matthew, how they talk about Jesus, the story of Jesus, and how it links up or parallels the story of Moses. And so you're kind of just being told as a reader that um, Jesus is basically walking in the footsteps of Moses. He's going through the same type of situation because he's the Moses was the savior in 1400 BC, and Jesus is the savior now in the first century. And so, you know, Joseph goes to Egypt. Both the Joseph, who is the son of Jacob, uh, the 11th of the 12 tribes of Israel, um, and then you know, 1700 years later or whatever, Joseph, the father of Jesus, goes to Egypt because he hears that Herod the king is you know, killing all young boys. And so they go to Egypt to hide out. Joseph goes to Egypt. The first Joseph goes to Egypt, you know, because he was a prisoner, and eventually, you know, gets the confidence of the Pharaoh and becomes the Pharaoh's right-hand man. But there are many more parallels. You know, they eventually come back to Judea, Moses and Jesus, and they pass through water, and they are tempted by bread, and so on and so forth. It just shows that the ancients, that's how they communicated, kind of a little bit of a hidden or coded message that that Jesus is kind of following in the footsteps of Moses, and Moses was the savior, and so, you know, pay attention to what Jesus is doing. So now, keeping that in mind, we're going to apply that same idea of typology when reading the Gospels and Josephus, the War of the Jews. Not so much from the Old Testament, although the Old Testament also comes in as well. Same book of Exodus. But so, okay, so so Atwill's thesis is basically that the story of Jesus, okay, they lay down, you know, the various events in Jesus's his 3-year ministry. He had a 3-year ministry, and Titus, the general fighting in the War of the Jews, also had a 3-year campaign. And if you pay attention to Jesus's ministry, he goes to exactly the same places that Titus's military campaign goes. So they are one is the type of the other. Where Jesus goes, then eventually Titus goes. So, for example, they go to this place called Gennesareth, which I believe is on the Sea of Galilee. And we're talking about Luke 19, verses 37 to 43. He came into full view of the city. For the time is coming upon thee when thy foes will throw up around the earthworks and a wall, investing thee. Now he's talking about Jerusalem, the wall around the city of Jerusalem. Throw up around the earthworks and a wall, investing thee and hemming thee in on every side, and level you and your children within you, and they will not leave one stone upon another in you, because you did not know the time of your visitation. So Jesus is prophesying that the city of Jerusalem is going to be encircled with a wall, and that it will hem in people on every side, and then the temple will be destroyed, and they will not leave one stone upon another. Or it doesn't say anything about the temple, I guess. So they will not leave one stone upon another in you, because you did not know the time of your visitation. So then we move over to Josephus. And now keep in mind that Josephus is supposed to be a historian. He is supposed to be telling you events that actually happened. Now, the Bible, that's questionable. It's mostly a religious text, but some people use it for history. But Josephus is like overtly a historian, so to speak. But keep in mind that Josephus is a Jew who was a traitor. He eventually decided to defect to the Romans, and then gave Vespasian the star prophecy telling him that he's going to be the emperor. When he does become emperor, Josephus rewards him and adopts him and brings him to the court of Rome, and he becomes the court historian. And Josephus records, Titus orders his soldiers to build a wall around the whole city. Titus, like Jesus, saw the encircling of the city as an event sanctioned by God. And Josephus then says, who inspired his soldiers with a divine fury. Then he goes on and says that Titus did not merely burn Jerusalem and defile its temple, but ordered that they should be left exactly as Jesus had foreseen, with, quote, not one stone upon another. And so that is exactly what Jesus predicted would happen, and that is exactly what did happen. Or at least according to the history of that Josephus wrote. And this was well known up until throughout the medieval times. This passage of Josephus was actually used to prove that Jesus was a great prophet. And in many different versions of the Bible, Josephus's War of the Jews was a book of the Bible, or it was part of the Bible. Apparently, he is still part of the Bible for the preterist sect, but that's the only one that still maintains Josephus as part of the Bible, War of the Jews. Now, I guess that the medieval people kind of figured out that, okay, well, Jesus did prophesy what happened, but what he's basically doing is he's prophesying the coming of God, and that was Titus, so it's kind of like a trap. You're trapped. Jesus prophesies the existence of a lot of these things that happen. He talks about, like, really the second coming, his second coming. But his second coming is Titus. And so I think that caused most of the medieval Christians to kind of get Josephus out of their Bible. Yeah, so that's basically what Atwell said. That's Matthew 24, 42 to 44. Therefore, you must also be ready, for it is at a time when you do not expect him that the Son of Man will come, and that the person whose visitation actually brought about the destruction of Jerusalem was not Jesus, but Titus. In his prophecy, if his prophecy did envision events from the coming war between the Romans and the Jews, the Son of Man, Jesus warned of, seems not to have been himself, but Titus. Okay, so that's one type. That's one typology, and that shows that both of them, these events are both happening. I was saying that they were happening in Gennesareth. This is actually in Jerusalem. So this is part of the, events that are parallels. And so you can see that, basically Jesus is a type for Titus, or vice versa. Okay, let me see here. Trying to find the next section. So the next, I think, the next section is where they get to Gennesareth. And so this is the beginning of Jesus's ministry, his 3-year ministry, which is a parallel of Titus's 3-year military campaign. Every place that Jesus goes, then Titus goes. And so then they come to Gennesareth, and that is better known as the Sea of Galilee. And there's a military battle there that Titus fights, but in the story of Jesus, he is putting together his ministry, and he sees the two fishermen, I think Simon and Andrew, and recruits them to be his disciples, and then he exhorts them to become fishers or catchers of men. He says that, no longer are you a fisherman, but now you're a fisher of men. You're going to be recruiting people into our ministry. And he says this while standing on the very spot where Josephus describes Titus's military campaign at Gennesareth. Now, what's really interesting and kind of insulting about these parallels is that, okay, so when Jesus says to Simon and Andrew, I think it's those two, that you're going to become fishers of men, that sounds kind of like symbolic religious language. You're not really, going to become fishers of men. It's not something to be taken literally. But as you read Josephus's story, you discover that it is actually, literally, he is talking about fishers of men. And so what happens in this military campaign is that Titus is fighting against these zealot Jews, and they're fighting on the Sea of Galilee. And let's see if I can find this right spot. Sorry here. I wish I could find this. I'm not locating it. But I know the details though. But what happens is that Titus engages these Jews on the lake of Sea of Galilee, the lake of Gennesareth, and here Atwill says, while standing on the very spot where the Jews would be caught like fish, and referred to the Jewish rebels as fish. Okay, they did throughout the War of the Jews are referred to pejoratively as fish. But I'm trying to find the actual passage from Josephus where he explains what happens. Okay, I think it's right here. Romans caught Jews like fish at Gennesareth. Rebels led by a leader named Jesus were drowning in the sea. If they lifted their heads up above the water, they were either killed by darts or caught by the vessels. But if, in the desperate case they were in, they attempted to swim to their enemies, the Romans cut off either their heads or their hands. And so, where Jesus exhorts his followers to become fishers of men, Titus is exhorting his soldiers to also become literal fishers of men. Yes, so that is another one of the types. And again, it's important to note that these are both taking place at the exact same spot, at Gennesareth on the Lake of Galilee, or the Sea of Galilee. The first events took place at Jerusalem. Okay, so the next type, or the next story in line, has to do with the Passover lamb. And so we'll get into that tomorrow. This is moving pretty slow, but we'll get through it. And thanks for tuning in today.